Hi. So as was said, I'm Jeff Natick. I'm a front-end engineer and product designer at Machine Metrics. We are located in Northampton, Massachusetts, but we just opened up an office in Cambridge and are recruiting heavily right now after raising our Series A. But this actually isn't about what I do, even though it's very interesting stuff. This is about freelance stuff. Because freelance gives me the opportunity to do things that I wouldn't maybe get to do day to day and use new technologies, which is why I enjoy doing it. So I got this client request, and they had the situation where they have a pricing team and they have a marketing team, and the pricing team updates this pretty insane Excel file that has its own little application built into it that they've made with pivot tables. So sometimes they give that to the clients or their customers, and sometimes they have this marketing CMS that the marketing team updates after the pricing team updates their stuff. And as you'll soon find out, there's like so many items in here that I can't imagine trying to keep up with it on the marketing side. So they really just wanted to unify that and have a single source of truth that they could update and not worry about it anymore. So I said, no problem. I can do that. And my initial idea is I said, I think we could maybe have you guys use Google Sheets. It offers a JSON API. I could probably just query that and write a little React app that dealt with that. Otherwise, I could write a backend service that you guys start using instead of Excel, and you'd update it once and it could go, wherever you wanted. I also thought about using serverless stuff to do CSV to JSON and kind of slice up the JSON and be able to just get little chunks of it. But there's a problem because I didn't actually open the Excel file. It was over 20 megs when I exported it, and it actually contained about 69,000 rows, each of which contained 23 columns, which had a little under 1.6 million cells. So I tried to upload it into Google Sheets, and it just killed my browser tab. And then I started thinking, this stuff doesn't change that often. It seems unnecessary to have to query it all the time. And I talked to them about a new backend service, and they were actually pretty excited about that. But it felt like it was going to become a really big project, as it certainly would have. They also would have had to leave Excel, and talking with their sales team, these people are Excel wizards that can write macros and update all these columns and rows. And having them write SQL queries or stuff, they sort of knew about that, but it felt like it wasn't necessarily doing them service to move it over to that. And serverless, it probably would have worked fine, but again, you'd be requesting a lot of JSON for each different page load. So Gatsby. I actually wanted to use Gatsby a few years ago for a different project where I was rendering a lot of documentation for a client, and they had an API that you could do this with, but they weren't really understanding the whole build process, and so we ended up going a different route where it would just live render in React. So for this, I chose static site generators, and static site generators I hadn't really had a lot of experience with, but I knew about them. And there's a static site generator for pretty much every flavor of programming language that you're into. I think Hugo is maybe Go, and Hexo is maybe Node, Jekyll is Python. And they traditionally combine Markdown or something similar to that with templates, and they produce static content like GitHub pages or something like that. Static assets, so you can host them anywhere and you don't have to worry about it, which is really great. Static hosting, you could have a really cheap server, or you could use one of these new things like Netlify or Surge or Now, or put it on S3. And so there's this concept of the Jamstack, which Netlify just threw a Jamstack conf. And so the idea is JavaScript APIs and markup instead of traditional LAMP stacks and whatnot. So What's not jam is if you are running your site off of a CMS as far as like rendering the page and querying at page load time, rendering from a traditional Ruby or PHP app, or even doing isomorphic rendering on the server side. And so jam benefits, they're super fast. There's no longer a concern about like SQL injection or anything like that. Scale, if you throw it on one of these sites like Netlify, their CDNs can handle presumably any amount of traffic that you throw at it, and you don't have to worry about spinning up new EC2 instances or anything like that. And the flexibility is actually the thing that's fairly unique, I think, to Gatsby especially, but you can pick and choose from what sources you want instead of being locked into, say, Drupal or WordPress or whatever. So Gatsby is a React and GraphQL and Node-based static site generator. It runs Node during the build phase, and the thing that really sets Gatsby apart is that, unlike Jekyll perhaps, you can pull content from any source you want, like a CMS or an API, and then during the build phase, and then turn that into static assets. When it comes out on the other side, it's actually still a React application. So you still have all the functionality that you'd have with a single page app. So again, it's not just Markdown. For my project, I was pulling from CSVs. Could have actually just had them probably upload the Excel file itself, but that seems scary to me for some reason. And you can pick and choose from the APIs that you want. This is actually an example that was in a talk by somebody from the Gatsby core team, where he talks about a traditional WordPress app that you might make that has, like, say, a subscription service. And so you have to have this like plugin, and you have to have a LAMP server. With Gatsby, you could actually do the same thing. You could have Contentful, which is a CMS as a service sort of headless thing, and you just use a Stripe API and put it on Netlify, and it would be totally static, and you wouldn't have to worry about any of that. There's a ton of Gatsby plugins. I've only scratched the surface. So last night when I looked, there's 572. This is a few of them that I found in my package JSON that I had been using. Sometimes it feels a little funny to like install a plugin to use Google Fonts, but when you realize that it's actually pulling from the source and using it in the build process, that's how it goes. So Gatsby running Node allowed me to drop these CSVs into a folder, and magically, honestly, it pulled them in, and then I was able to write a few methods that hooked into things that it was doing to manipulate those nodes as it was churning through every single cell, and manipulate that data, or form it however I wanted. So let me just actually pause for a second and open up this. So you can see it's actually a pretty good test of VS Code's ability, because there it is. There's my CSV, that 69,000 rows, and it didn't take long to open. But so these CSVs are sitting here. Basically, the way that it works is that this is the data, and then the pricing team gave me this other small one, which is categories and how to treat certain columns depending on the category. So what I could do with that is Gatsby has this Gatsby node file where you can use these things like onCreate node, and so this runs every time that Gatsby creates a node. And so what I'm able to do is say, hey, if you're creating a node from one of my CSVs, create a new node field. I'm just doing something that I generate a slug, like a route path based off of, these have a locale, so a language, and then it has a product line. And so I'm able to just construct that, put it back in the node. I happen to just make the locale lowercase because I was afraid that all their columns were uppercase, and I knew that would burn me eventually. So I'm able to then also create pages based off that. So what this means is that the pricing team can add a new locale. They can add new categories. Doesn't affect this at all. They just have to rebuild it, and it's going to generate all the pages for all the new locales or all the categories or however that changes. And then it will run a query against GraphQL. So Gatsby generates all these nodes in Redux, and then later establishes a schema in GraphQL and allows you to write queries against it, which then provides a page with just the data that it needs. And so using this slug was just an easy way for me to identify what pages, rows belonged on what pages. So the nice thing is that this all is just out of the box. I used the Gatsby starter basically, and it set a lot of things up for me. I added a few plugins, and it gives you a GraphQL IDE. So as soon as you start up Gatsby Develop, it chugs through all this stuff, and then it's running. You can hot reload, and then you have a secondary thing that you have a GraphQL IDE, so you can write queries against it, figure out how you're to compose those, and the experience is just really nice. So let me jump back to some slides here for a second. So as I was just talking about, that's that dynamic page creation, which makes this really powerful for my use case especially, because it really empowers that pricing team to not worry about this stuff. You can, as you can with GraphQL and React, things like Apollo, like we just saw, you can just write a query that gets put in a component that wraps your page template, and will handle that for you. So when the page loads, that data is just there. You don't have any boilerplate. There's no actions or reducers if you don't want to deal with that. It just exists, and it's just React at that point. You just write a React app. There's nothing Gatsby-ish or special about it after that initial build phase. So performance-wise, this is pretty awesome. I've been used to writing single-page apps that can be pretty heavy at first because we're trying to just dump a lot of stuff on the user at the initial load. I ran Google Audit, their lighthouse thing in Google Developer Tools, and it scored all 100s except for 199 because I was loading a Google font. So I'm sure that I could steal that 1 point back if I probably was bundling that. So really fast performance. Each page that you load is only about 200K. That's not a thing that you really see anymore, honestly. And so Netlify, the way that I set this up initially is that the client can now add a CSV to the repository, push it up to GitHub, which triggers on Netlify. You can run your build command, and so the client now is just updating this, and the build runs and updates the site. There's no machinery besides that. Netlify, for instance, also offers you hooks so you can trigger them if, say, you are using something like Contentful or any CMS, and you can automate that. So every time that you save a post or something, it hits that hook and tells Netlify to rebuild your site. So some downsides of this project. The build time, because I'm throwing so many nodes at it, is pretty long. And it actually sometimes times out Netlify right now. So the client has a big internal team that is going to take this over and put it onto their own stuff with S3 and everything. And so that will go away. That won't be an issue. But I did notice that the build times varied. Even running the same build over and over again could vary within about a minute. And I found that there's probably an open issue in GitHub about that, so that was a little worrisome, but I also think I could probably cut out some stuff and probably make it a little faster. So before I get to that, let me just show you, this is, they don't have the URL bar there. Oh, I don't have an internet. Let's see. I still have it running locally. All right. So this is actually my local server running, and all of this is just generated by those CSVs. I wrote one template that was for the index that just generated one of these items for each category that it had, and then I had this drop down that populates itself with locale, so you can change the locale. And there's different categories depending on if you're in Europe or something. They may not sell something in Europe yet. I was able to do like things that you would do in any React app. Built a little shopping cart just so people could build a quote that persists in local storage, because it's just a JavaScript application despite it being generated by a static site generator. So, yeah, this is, these pages are all just, all have just the data that they need, and they're just super lean. So far, things have been working well thanks to Gatsby. Gatsby is not just for small projects. This project is a small project, but it has a lot of data. I think if you were managing a very large e-commerce site, you probably could use Gatsby for it. I don't see any reason not to. Using it at Machine Metrics might be tricky because so much of our stuff is particular data queried now. So it would work, but you probably wouldn't get a lot of the benefit from having it generated ahead of time. You also can just port over, if you have a WordPress site or a Rails API, you can just write this against that and use either a Gatsby plugin that pulls from that, or you can write your own and leave that and let it do what it does best. Like WordPress is pretty good at managing content. The interface is pretty nice. So there's an amazing team, and I believe they've raised some money in the last year or so, and they're just doing really awesome things. Gatsby 2 just came out fairly recently. The documentation is incredible. I was actually looking at it just before coming here, and it's just super in depth. I haven't actually seen other documentation that really covered as much as it did. And the developer experience is really amazing. You can just do so many powerful things, and while it feels a little weird at first to just be installing plugins, it just really solves a lot of simple problems for things that you would otherwise have to write yourself that have been done 1,000 times. So if I could just also give a final plug that I am on the committee at the Nerd Summit, which is a conference that happens in Amherst, and we have a request for proposals out right now. So if you're interested at all in speaking, I'm on the front end track, and no experience is needed. If you've ever thought about speaking, it's a great place to get a start. It's free to everybody. Also, there's no entry fee, so it's very accessible, and it's hosted at UMass Amherst. So check that out at nerdsummit.org. So thank you.